presentation is The Inventions and Life of Garrett A. Morgan, and his grandchildren right here in the front row are going to be the presenters for us. I think it's going to be a very special program because I had the chance to spend time with them last week, both here, and we went to lunch and we talked, and you know, I think they carry quite a bit of their grandfather in them, you know, in terms of the personality and drive and overcoming obstacles. Just a wonderful story that they have to share today. Well, let me introduce the three panel members that will be providing the presentation today. First of all, we have Sandra Morgan. She Officer of the Most Excellent Order of the British Empire. Let's give Sandra a nice applause. Okay. And then we have Garrett Morgan, or Garrett Morgan III. He's recently retired, I think, right? Or not recently, a while ago? Okay. You're a young man, I can tell you. So let's give Gary a round of applause. And then lastly, we have Corinne. And I spent a lot of time with her at lunch the other day, and we had a good time together. And I'm looking forward to what all three of you have to share. Corinne is retired from the city of Cleveland as Director of Employment and on-the-job training. So the floor is yours, okay?
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming out for this presentation. It is my honor and my pleasure to be here to talk to you today about Garrett Morgan, our grandfather, but also a great member of our community. He was both a businessman, entrepreneur, inventor, civic leader, and all-around fantastic contributor to our society. Today I'm going to talk to you about our grandfather in three terms, really, and this is the way that I think about his accomplishments. First, as you know, he's an explorer, because it took a lot of courage for him to leave Kentucky, come to Ohio, and then ultimately come to Cleveland. I also think of him, again, as a businessman, entrepreneur, and ersatz inventor, because he didn't think of himself as an inventor, but really more of a problem solver through business and entrepreneurship. And then lastly, as a civic leader in Northeast Ohio and a family man. And I know that my siblings are going to join me by talking about him really as Garrett Morgan, the man, the personal experiences that they had with him, and how he enriched their lives. You know, for me, he knew me better than I knew him, because he passed away when I was roughly 2 years old. However, his legacy lived large in our family, in our household, every single day. Our father is Garrett Morgan Jr., and through my father, I learned the importance of our legacy, how to conduct and carry ourselves at all times, and what both a blessing and sometimes a burden it was to be the granddaughter of Garrett Morgan. But all that being said, now let's go. I'm going to keep it kind of short because I want to give everybody more than ample time, not only to speak, but to ask questions and to have some fun with us. So here we go. And again, the name of my presentation is patented, The Innovative Life of Garrett Morgan, which was really and truly innovative. He invented himself over and over and over again, like many of us do. All right, so let's start here. Garrett Morgan, as you know, was born in Kentucky. He was born in a little town. Really, it was called Paris, Kentucky, but the part that he was from was Claysville, which was the African-American part of town. Now, his parents, Sidney and Eliza Morgan, met while they were enslaved, and they lived in Lexington. And you know, we think about enslavement as being mainly agricultural in our society, and for the most part it was. But you know, interestingly, Garrett's father, Sidney, worked for the railroad, And his mother, I'm not quite sure what she did. I think that she was, like many people, a housewife, took care of her family and did what she could to support the family. But they were a part of the Morgan household. And the Morgans were they were not really farmers. They started out as farmers, but they went on to then become brokers of both hemp and, unfortunately, of human lives. But they actually lived in an urban environment. And then once after emancipation, they moved roughly 20 minutes away, well, by car now, but maybe 10 miles away from Lexington into Paris, Kentucky. And that is where Garrett was born and raised. Went to the Branch School for Colored Children, which is no longer around, but there's a beautiful park right next to where the Branch School was, and it is appropriately named Garrett Morgan Park now, which is fantastic. So, he grew up in Kentucky, went to school. He was known as a good student at the Branch School, but like many people, he went only through the 6th grade, and that's pretty much what was expected, either the 6th or the 8th grade, not only for African American students, but for many students, particularly if you were poor. You went to school and then you went to work. He was no different, but he was a good student, and he studied, everything, reading, writing, math, and a little bit of science, as much as was available to him at that time. It was at that time that he decided that Kentucky was not the place for him. He was always thought to work hard with his head and not with his hands. And that part of Kentucky at that time was not going to provide him with the opportunity to work with his head and show what he knew, because he knew himself, but it was widely acknowledged that he was very smart, right? And he had a lot more to offer than, to work as a sharecropper or to work as a laborer on the railroad or anything like that. He had big ideas and big plans, and he was not going to be stopped. He was literally going to shake the dust off of the towns there in Kentucky and make his way to Ohio. All right, so this begins the life of Garrett Morgan, the adventurer, right? How did he get here? He didn't jump on a train, he didn't buy a plane ticket and come here, or even on the bus. He made his way here by walking and then ultimately taking the ferry across the Ohio River. Where'd he go? Cincinnati. He worked in Cincinnati for 2 years or so, and he had a lifelong love of horses. And so he worked, I guess it was not a farm, but a place where they had horses, right? And enjoyed that very much. But you know what? And in the meantime, he got married too. He married a woman named Madge Nelson. It didn't work out for them because this was a very short-lived, what we would call a May-December kind of wedding, right? I mean, it was over pretty quickly. All the same, he still had ideas of the bright lights in the big city. And Cincinnati was not going to provide him with those opportunities either, because at the time, and this was at roughly the turn of the 20th century, Cincinnati was essentially Kentucky, only across the border, across the river. And so he still was not, yes, and some would say maybe still, but he didn't see himself as having much opportunity, again, in Cincinnati. And the bright lights of Cleveland were calling. This was a fantastic place to be. It was literally hopping with business. It was a center for innovation. There was the General Electric shop that was here, right? Inventions coming out from everywhere. The Morgans, and by Morgans I mean JP, was here because he was investing in everything. Don't forget that the telegraph system was invented here, that the Rockefeller family was here, railroad magnates were here, the Van Sweringens. Everything exciting and wonderful in the world of business, in the world of technology, in the world of, just innovation writ large was happening right here in Cleveland. So who wouldn't want to be here? I mean, this was the place to be. So he packed himself up and, as I understand it, with a dime in his pocket, but with ambition in his soul, brought himself to Cleveland. He lived in Cleveland, for years, but when he first got here, he literally stayed in a rail car, the same rail car that he hitched a ride on, for 3 days while he figured out where he was going to go. He spoke to people in town. They sent him to a settlement house, so that he'd have a place to eat and sleep and rest and get cleaned up, which is what he did, and then went about finding himself a job. While he was here in Cleveland, he had no trouble finding jobs because he was industrious and smart and well-spoken and well-behaved. And so he worked at a number of places, one of them being Root McBride. While he was at Root McBride, he did a couple of really cool things. Number one, he noticed that productivity came to a stop, sometimes a grinding halt, because the belts on sewing machines, which at that time were motored by foot power, right? Many of us, our grandmothers had those sewing machines that you had to push the pedal, and it made the machine go. Well, it usually had a leather belt on the edge, and that belt frequently snapped. Well, at the time, the industry around sewing, that sort of thing, was very big here in Northeast Ohio. In fact, we were the third largest textile center in the United States, behind New York and Chicago, right? And so there were lots of immigrant women who worked in these shops, right? And so there was a couple of things. When these sewing machines went down, it was a loss of revenue for the company, but it often meant a loss of revenue for the women and men who were working there. Because if your machine wasn't rolling and those pieces weren't coming off of your machine, you weren't getting paid, because they were paid by the piece in many cases. And so it was literally the difference between their survival and their well-being. Well, my grandfather thought, there's got to be something better. We've got to be able to do something better, because these bands snap all the time. Productivity, suffers as a result of it, and everyone is losing money. So he thought, put his thinking cap on, and said, how about if we make this from rubber instead of leather, because it's more resilient, it has a lot more give. And number two, why don't we reconfigure it? Because instead of it just being a continuous loop going around, so that it can, bend out of shape, it can slip off of the edge, why don't we configure it as a figure eight? That way, the tension is even, right? It's less likely to slip off of the back of the sewing machine, and productivity will increase. And sure enough, he presented it to his bosses. They tried it. It worked like gangbusters, and everyone was happy. They were happy because productivity picked up. There was far less breakage of these rubber, essentially a giant rubber band, but far less breakage of these rubber bands. And the new configuration, as simple as it sounds, made sure that the tension was even at all times on the rubber band, and therefore, it continued to go. Well, they were delighted by that, thrilled. They gave him a $150 bonus, which in 1895 was a bunch of money. Okay, that was a lot of money. And they gave him a promotion. So he moved from being the person who swept the floors, and cleaned up in the factory, to the person who was the kind of the engineer. He made sure that the machines were working properly and attacked problems. I want to step back 1 minute, though, to the sewing machines, the factory floor, and the textile industry. If you can imagine, if you go down into the warehouse district here in Northeast Ohio today, you'll see the buildings that they all worked in, my grandfather, included. And if we think, he swept up the cotton, dust bunnies. He swept up the floors. It was critically important at that time that work be done, and be done properly. Why? Because when you're in a factory situation like that, and there's dust flying, and there's cotton bits flying, and threads, that had to all come up. If there had been any spark whatsoever of fire or electricity or anything, it could have caused a massive fire, and the whole building would have gone up in flames. And in fact, that is the reason that there were so many explosions and so many fires in these textile buildings to begin with, was because, the simplest thing, someone, a foreman smoking a cigarette and the ash from a cigarette catching on what we call dust bunnies, would have caused a flaming inferno in a matter of minutes. And we'll get to about firefighting in a minute. But that was why his job was really an important one, and I don't want people to think that, he just swept the floors. Well, it was critical to sweep the floors, and being able to move up in the organization also was a marvelous thing for him. It gave him the courage, I know, to continue thinking, to think big, to solve problems, which is what he did. Everything that he invented was ultimately an answer to a critical problem in our society, and he met those challenges, with grace, uniqueness, and aplomb, in my opinion. But anyway, back to the sewing factories. So he came up with this idea. They loved it. They paid him a handsome fee for his idea, and they gave him a promotion. And he thought, well, you know what? I can think bigger than this. Quite honestly, at the same time, he met our grandmother, Mary Hoshak, who was a Bohemian seamstress working in the garment industry, right? At that time, she was a white seamstress. He was an African American. Those relationships were not. They were looked down upon. They were not sanctioned, and so he was advised that he should stop the relationship with our grandmother, or he was going to be fired. And he said, you know what? Okay. I quit. I'm leaving. I don't need to, I'm bigger than this job. I'll find something else to do, but I'm certainly not going to abandon the woman I love or walk away from love, true love. And I think that's fantastic. Guess what our grandmother said? I quit too. Goodbye. And yes, ultimately she left her job as well because, they were in love. And she knew that once this relationship was public, that it was going to be very difficult for her to maintain her job and, in fact, to maintain a relationship with her family. And so she, too, chose true love, over societal norms, which I think is fantastic. So, after they left the textile industry, they did a lot of things. Garrett Morgan was a hustler, all right, by modern terminology. He had a poultry shop where he sold, ducks and chickens and eggs and all that sort of thing. They had a children's clothing store. My grandmother was a master seamstress, and even when I was a child, sewed a lot of outfits for me. Easter, Christmas, holiday robes, all that sort of thing. I got all that stuff from my grandmother, who she made it herself. All that being said, they opened a clothing store and sold clothing in this store. She did piecework for the Richmond brothers, which was directly across the street from where they lived, right? Because in her spare time, she could run off a number of pieces and get money for that. They worked hard. They did everything that they could in order to support then their growing family, but also for my grandfather to stretch his entrepreneurial muscles, right? To learn about business, to do what he wanted to do, really. In that time then, he established the Garrett Morgan Hair Refinery. This business began in 1911. And it was kind of an answer to everything that was going on around him. You remember, Madam C.J. Walker was becoming very successful and in her business and very well known to the public. She had a whole line of hair care products and beauty schools and what have you. And she became the first African American female millionaire in our country, in our history, actually. And my grandfather, I think, was inspired by that. But never mind Madam C.J. Walker, there were a number of other companies that were springing up as well. And this was all in response to the fact that there was a growing middle class, African American middle class in this country. And they wanted products, hair care products, makeup products, nice clothing. they wanted what everybody else wanted, right? And so my grandfather was more than happy to oblige with the Garrett Morgan black hair oil stain, with a variety of soaps and other products that, salves and creams and what have you. Even this business continued through 1970, about 75 or early 1976, and our own father was downstairs in the basement making up these potions and concoctions and shipping them all over the place. I was the one who held the sponge onto the labels and wrapped them onto the bottles and stacked them up on the clothes dryer until they were ready to be packaged. I remember those days very well. But at any rate, the hair care refinery did very well. It sold all up and down the East Coast in a drugstore or a store near you. Rexall was one of his big customers. And one of the things that he would do, the consummate marketer and salesman, was go around to Pittsburgh or all over the place. But he would go to barbershops and he would offer to do someone's, I will pay for your haircut, beard shaving, what have you, if you will allow me to use my products on you. We're going to demonstrate my products on you. Well, most men would say yes, a free haircut. Why not? Okay. And so, they would get their hair washed with a certain soap, the Garrett Morgan, hair growing and scalp titillating soap. And then if they had gray, they would get their hair dyed with the black hair oil stain, right? And their beard too, if they wanted. And, they would look and smell marvelous after all of this. And after the demonstration was over, he would take a bottle of black hair oil stain and he would glug it right down. Give it a shake and glug, glug, glug. Drink it right down. All right? And just like you, everyone would gasp, "Oh my God, what'd you do that for? What's the matter with you?" Well, you know what? His products were sustainable and they were organic even before we started talking about organic and sustainable products, right? He said, "You know what? These products can't hurt you. They're made with castor oil and beeswax and all that stuff. And they won't hurt you. It's not going to hurt your hair. It's not going to hurt your scalp. It's not even going to hurt your insides. Witness, I drank a whole bottle of this stuff and I'm perfectly fine." Personally would think I'd have a big stomach ache after all that, but I don't know. At any rate, this business was one of the ways that he was able to really stabilize his income, have a reliable income, and to be able to then start to, again, think big. Because one of the things that we know is that in order to be creative and inventive, you have to think, right? You need the creative space to be able to think. And if you're always running and you're always moving, you really don't have the time or the energy or the thought time for being creative, right? I mean, very few of us do. And so this was an opportunity for him to be able to step back a little bit, because remember, now he's got a clothing store which is successful. He actually has people who are working for him that are making the clothing instead of my grandmother, grinding away. So now she no longer has to do piecework for the Richmond brothers. Okay, she can put her thinking cap on too, right? And they can do a lot more now because their income is stabilizing. They gave up the chicken shop, right? They gave that up. They stayed with the clothing, right? Maintained that. Now they've got the black hair oil stain and all the other products that they did trade shows, they were everywhere selling this product, right? And so now they're stabilizing here. What's next? Well, again, let's remember that this was a time when there were fires, there were explosions, there were all kinds of things going on. As a reminder, right here in Northeast Ohio, there was a telegraph machine in every Standard Oil gas station, shop, or factory. Why? Because they had so many explosions that they needed to have something that got information directly to the fire department immediately so that they could get there. It was crazy. There were, again, lots and lots of these explosions and fires. Maybe one of the most seminal ones was the shirtwaist fire that took place in, I believe it was in Chicago. But it was a factory where women were making shirtwaist dresses. They were in the factory building. There were a lot of safeguards that we would never allow today, or that a lot of things that we would never allow. There were many, many lapses in safety. You know, doors locked, windows locked, that sort of thing. One way to get into or out of a building. We would never allow that anymore. But that was kind of the standard of the day. As a result of a fire breaking out, these women were not able to get out of the building, and many of them had to jump out of windows, in some cases jumping to their death, you know, in order to escape the flames of the fire. More importantly, firemen and other safety-related men at that time couldn't get into the building, you know, because they would go in and the noxious fumes and the heat from the fire and the licking flames, you know, would keep them from entering into the building to save people. So they could only go so far, and then they had to retreat and then go back in again and then retreat, or try to catch people who were jumping out of windows. It was horrific. It was one of the worst fires in our country's history, and unfortunately many, many women died as a result of that fire. I think my grandfather felt that very deeply because, remember, he worked in one of those factories and he knew the women that worked in those factories and their, you know, really their plight. These were women that were not doing this just for fun. They were working there in order to support their families, to bring money into the household, and to help, you know. And so he understood that, you know, there needed to be something that helped our firefighters and others to, you know, to bring people to safety. And it was in that context, I believe, that he thought about the safety hood. Now, let's see, because I may have skipped over a couple of pictures here. Yes, this is a before and after. You know, if you don't use Garrett Morgan's hair products, you know, look out. If you do use Garrett Morgan's hair products, look at how refined and smart and sophisticated you look, right? Okay, there is definitely a method to the madness. All right, and I will point out that he also received a patent for an uncurling comb, otherwise known as a hot comb, right? But this patent he didn't receive until the 1950s, and so it had been something that had been in use for many, many years, and he finally got around to getting it patented in the 1950s. But still, always thinking. So here we are with the safety hood. Garrett Morgan was not the Garrett Morgan safety hood is unique for any number of reasons, but he wasn't the first person to try to create a safety hood, right? There were some that looked like it was from, you know, Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea. There were all kinds of hoods, but none of them were as effective as his. Why? A couple of reasons. Number one, if you see in the back, there's a couple of long tubes, right? And these tubes reach down to essentially the floor or thereabouts. Why? Because when there's a fire, where does hot air and gas and noxious fumes go? They rise to the top, all right? And so what is left for the bottom? Then the cool, clean air, all right? So that's number one. Number two, there was a filter pack that was added to his safety hood that would further filter, you know, noxious fumes. So by the time the oxygen got to, you know, your lungs, it was much cleaner and certainly cool. And in the front, the place where your eyes and mouth were, many of these had glass. What would happen to the glass when you walked into a burning hot building with flames licking everywhere? It would explode, okay? And so you wanted exploding glass in their eyes and in their mouth. And so he used mica and some other products that were flame resistant and would not melt into one's face and would not explode into one's eyes, right? And so the combination of accessibility to fresh air, having a filter to further clean, you know, the air that was coming in, and having something on you protecting one's face that didn't explode or otherwise melt onto one's face is relatively important. And those are the things that got him this patent, right? I mean, these are the changes to other designs that allowed him to receive the patent for the safety hood. Now, this safety hood was also great because it allowed people to spend a lot more time inside of a burning building or a fume, noxious, poisonous space and get people and get them out. Before, it would be maybe 2 or 3 minutes that a person would be able to go in before they had to get out. Otherwise, they'd be overcome by the fumes as well. In this instance, they were able to go in and spend maybe 15 minutes. And I believe that that's about right now. 15 to 20 minutes, a team will go in and they will get out in that time, and then another team will go in and replace them, because that's about as much time as one should spend in a noxious environment. And the firefighters here can tell me if I'm wrong or not. But I believe that right about now, even still, it's about 15 or 20 minutes that one spends in a building before you have to come out of there. And Garrett Morgan's safety hood allowed one to spend about 15 minutes inside without having to come back out. And that was revolutionary. That helped to save lives, plain and simple. All right, so he started this business. He was cooking right along. He thought, okay, he took this safety hood to the New York Safety Exposition, where it was showcased and actually won first prize. He submitted the patent in 1911 or 12. He received the patent in 1914. Right during World War I, and it played an important role in that war as well. But it was important to note that he won first prize at the New York Safety Exposition. However, he could not accept his own award. Because of the prevailing, racial attitudes of the day, he was not able to accept his own award. But you know what? He was a clever man and absolutely undaunted. And so he went there with a couple of people, to showcase it. He pretended that he was Big Chief Mason, a Native American chief from a conveniently faraway Canadian tribe that no one could, it was hard to say the name of this tribe, and so people just thought, it's a Canadian tribe or whatever, okay, fine. But he went in, he spent a few minutes inside of a tent that was filled with gases, and he came out and he was just fine. Right? Others said, let me try it. They went in and tried it, came out, they were just fine. Okay, and so, hooray, he won. But the person who was, hawking him, so to speak, or telling the story of these gas masks, pretended he was Garrett Morgan. And so when it was time to accept the award, he accepted the award on our grandfather's behalf. I'm sure that in many ways that was disappointing, to him, that he could not lay claim to, the joy and the happiness that should have been his, for his invention. But, on the other hand, he was there, and it was his product, and it won first prize. And I think that's all that mattered, quite honestly. It was self-satisfaction, if nothing else, right? And so, great. Safety hood, got the patent in 1914. There were sales to many fire departments and police departments around the country. Of course, sometimes sales ebbed when they found out that there was an African-American inventor of the product. But by and large, I think that for many, they were overcome with the fact that it's more important to have safety materials than it is to worry about if it came from a black man or not. And so, good for him that he got the sales. All right, here he is modeling his safety hood. He had, again, the consummate salesman. He had all kinds of materials that showcased his safety hood. He demonstrated it himself all over the place, and it even got Navy contracts for his safety hood, which is pretty impressive for the time period that he was in. So, let's move on to Cleveland, because Cleveland was one of the fire departments that did not buy his safety hoods. Okay, and then they found themselves in a precarious situation. So in 1916, or thereabouts, there was work going on here in Cleveland. They had started digging what is near the Westerly water filtration plant now, these pipes out into the lake in order to for filtrating water. Why? Because Cleveland was growing by leaps and bounds. There was a lot of pollution in the water right along the lake because people were, companies, it was being misused. And we even had a couple of outbreaks of like malaria and some other things here in Northeast Ohio, which is hard to believe, in modern times, but it is what it is. So they were out digging out into the lake. They were way out, like even though they call it the 5-mile crib, it's actually about 3 miles. But they were out in the middle of the lake and under the lake digging these tunnels in order to facilitate water filtration. And P.S., the workers, who were called sand hogs, found it unsafe even then. These are men that worked, they were mostly immigrants, they worked for $1 a day to go and do very dangerous work. And they complained that there was an unsafe environment. But there were no unions, and they didn't have anyone to speak up on their behalf. And so they continued to do the work, because $1 a day is better than nothing a day. They hit a gas pocket underneath there, and it exploded. And of course, noxious gas, you're under Lake Erie and 3 miles out. Not promising. Well, the SOS call came back to shore. They sent a team down to rescue them. The team went out down the shaft, and as soon as the doors opened on the elevator shaft, a rush of noxious fumes and literally knocked them to their knees. They were not able to help or do anything either. And so, of course, they got nervous. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? They called Garrett Morgan, and he and his brother, with a carload full of gas masks and their pajamas, went down to the lake and helped with the rescue. They went under. First, he and his brother Frank went under because nobody else. They were worried. They were scared. He went down, looked around, got one of those big carts, loaded bodies on, came back up. Hurrah! Okay. I guess you made it. We'll go back down now. All right, and so they all went down and retrieved bodies and a couple of live people, got them all out. Sadly, he did not get the recognition that he deserved for that either. The plain dealer, this was a story that was in the paper, and it was above the fold. Plain dealer, above the fold. This picture actually ran. It ran in the Plain Dealer and the press, and I will show you where he is. If I can see, this is him right here. His gas mask on his back, helping to move people out. And yet they said, oh, Garrett Morgan, was he really even there? Okay. Yeah. So, again, a bit of a disappointment, but he was not undaunted by this, right? He continued to do his good works. This gas mask was used in World War I. He gave the patent to the U.S. government for their use of this. And there's a great mural down in Mexico City painted by Diego Rivera. If you ever go to their National Museum, you will see that there's an ode to World War I of soldiers marching, and they're all wearing the Garrett Morgan safety hood, which is a really fantastic and cool thing to see. All right, so this is a more refined version of the gas mask, but I think that we can all agree that this gas mask, even right now, is a critical bit of a fireman's pack as well as a police officer's pack, and anyone who does any kind of safety monitoring has to have a gas mask. It is critical to our safety even now. And this is just a picture of the centennial of the Lake Erie crib disaster. It was a very special day for me, and I know my siblings too, and other family members, because it was special primarily, not only because it honored our grandfather, but because we got to meet the families of people who were saved by him. And 2 generations later, these people are still grateful to Garrett Morgan for his legacy, the work that he did, in some cases physically bringing their family members, out of that crib, and certainly for retrieving bodies when that was the case. So, he was a man of many ideas. As a reminder, now he's got clothing that they're still doing. He's got the Garrett Morgan hair refinery. He's got the Garrett Morgan safety hood, all right, as a business. And now let's think about a different side of public safety. You can see the absolute chaos of what a 1920s style road would be. At that time, there were cars, carts, horses, horse-drawn carts, pedestrians, bicycles, you name it. Everything was on the road at any given time, including even some trolleys, right? And so imagine what traffic must have looked like and what control of traffic must have been, all right? Because at that time, they had, in the 1920s, the most prevalent traffic signal was a stop and go sign. It was literally either you stop or you go, all right? Well, you know what? That was very difficult for people because, as we know, then as now, most accidents happen in the intersection, right? People don't know what to do. Oh, stop, okay, some people would stop and someone would run into them. Or go, you know, horses don't read, do they? You know, they don't know what to do. And a lot of people didn't read either, by the way, but, you know, it was a difficult time, you know, for people and traffic. And so Garrett Morgan came up again with an idea. It was not the first traffic signal, which, by the way, the first traffic signal was invented in England. It went up in 1868 in front of the House of Commons. And it was also just a simple red and green structure, but it was, I think that they were like kerosene lamps, and it caught on fire and almost caught the House of Commons on fire. And they said, okay, that's the end of that. Those came down. So you'll see here, this is his original plan for the traffic signal, right? It was stop and go, but it also had a couple of really interesting features. Now in his, and I will demonstrate that the arms were essentially like this and would tell you either to stop or to go on the edges, okay? If when it changed, the arms came around and switched, but they also could go up. And they would go up, but when thanks for taking that picture, Gabrielle. Coming to Facebook soon. But when the arms would go up, it signaled that there was about to be a change in the traffic pattern, right? And so it was all clear the intersection, essentially, which is ultimately what became the yellow light. All right? And so when you see traffic, first of all, you see it goes from red directly to green, but from green always to yellow, always to this, all clear the intersection, there is going to be a change in traffic pattern. All right? Furthermore, one thing you'll notice is that in just about every case, the traffic signals for a couple of seconds, everyone will be red. No one will be green, right? And then it will change to green. And that's because even then, they knew that there were going to be people who were going to crash the light, right? That were going to go through the light or maybe not be able to stop. You know, again, if you're on a horse or if you're, something like that, you can't just stop on a dime. It was better to go through, to get through the intersection. The bottom line was the big difference to the Garrett Morgan tri-position traffic signal was that all clear the intersection and that 2 or 3 second of hang time where everyone was stopped around the intersection before the traffic pattern changed. Today they call that intelligent transportation systems, and in Washington, D.C., I believe it was 1998 or thereabouts, the U.S. Department of Transportation, under Secretary Rodney Slater, deemed Garrett Morgan the father of intelligent transportation systems and named the Intelligent Transportation Systems building, or the ITS building, after him in Washington, D.C. Then they subsequently named a metro stop after him as well. So there's the Garrett Morgan metro stop or station in Washington, D.C. It's actually in Maryland on the Blue Line on your way to Largo. So if you are ever in Washington and fancy a ride on the metro, take the Blue Line and it will take you directly to the Garrett Morgan stop, which is, I think, just 1 or 2 stops before Largo, which is at the end of the line. But anyway, it was a real honor and a delight to have Garrett Morgan recognized by the U.S. Department of Transportation as being the father of intelligent transportation systems, which is used now all around the world. And everywhere he is recognized as being the father of intelligent transportation. So now he's got the traffic signal. He was, I think he said, okay, I'm not giving up, but, this running a business and trying to manufacture safety hoods, manufacture hair care products, all of that is a little wearing. I'm going to sell this patent, which is what he did. He sold the patent to General Electric for roughly $40,000, which in 1923, that was in 1924 actually, and in $2,025 would be about $750,000 that he sold the patent for, which I know he was delighted by, because by then Garrett Morgan was a man of a certain age. Remember, he was born in 1877, so he was, I'm not going to say he was slowing down, not the case, but you know what, it was nice to have that money in your retirement plan, and to be able to do something with it, and to have those other businesses now. He was resting a little more comfortably, had a lot more time to think, right? And was able to go in some other directions. Well, first of all, he bought land. He bought some property that would soon become the Garrett Morgan, the Morgan Country Club, which was developed specifically for African Americans to be able to go out into the country and enjoy themselves, convene in nature, as many were forbidden from doing. There were many places, parks and country clubs and common spaces where we were not welcomed. And so, and we lived in urban environments that were devoid of a lot of trees and that. And so it was important to have some place to go. He was one of many. There were a number of country clubs that established themselves within kind of northeast Ohio. And the Cuyahoga Valley National Park has done a great job of cataloging all of these places, including the Garrett Morgan Country Club in Wakeman, to talk about, who owned them, the role they played in our region, and why, again, it was important to have access to nature by all people. All right? So there was that. But he also noticed that while he had his businesses growing, that there was very little opportunity for advertisement in mainstream media, as we call it today, right? And so he wanted to advertise in the Plain Dealer and the Cleveland Press. And they said, well, sorry, Mr. Morgan, but we do not take advertisements from colored businesses, right? And so, sorry, but we can't. And also, he noticed that the news that was being shared was almost always negative. There was never any celebration of this church or that, or celebration of anyone's accomplishments, or, little Susie Q turned 16 this week. None of that for us, right? And he thought it would be a good idea for us to have our own newspaper where we can celebrate ourselves, celebrate our accomplishments, share our achievements, and advertise our products. All right, and so he started the Cleveland Call. And guess what? It was very popular. The Call actually, for advertisers, other African American businesses couldn't advertise in the press or the Plain Dealer either, so where was it that they were going to advertise? In the Call. Guess what? The other stores recognized that African Americans buy groceries too. African Americans buy shoes too, right? And so they advertised in the paper as well. All of a sudden, the Plain Dealer and the press thought, wait a minute, something's going on here, and we're losing out on important revenue, and we're losing readers as well. All right, and so then, the two things happened. They said, oh, never mind that, Mr. Morgan, we now open our doors to you and to, others to advertise in our newspaper. Thanks. But more importantly, our grandfather, was able to make connections to merge the paper and become the Cleveland Call and Post, which was technically established in 1920 as the Call and Post. All right, you see here a picture of all the little paper boys, that distributed the paper far and wide, and they were fast and furious in getting those papers out. The Call and Post is today still distributed in Cleveland, Columbus, and Cincinnati, and it is the largest and the oldest African American newspaper in the state of Ohio. Thank you, grandfather. By the way, Don King is now the publisher of the newspaper. He's a little flamboyant, okay? But he still honors the legacy of Garrett Morgan, and that's what matters to me. So there you go. There is Garrett Morgan. I mean, he did so much in his lifetime. He ran for city council, again, because he felt that our voices were not being heard. We were taxpayers. It was taxation without representation, right? And so in 1932 or 33, he ran for city council in Cleveland. He didn't win, but what he did do was make people aware in City Hall that there was a voting bloc that they needed to pay attention to. He was a member of the NAACP, one of the founding members here. He was a member of the Cleveland Negro Businessmen's League. He did many, many things, and I know that my sister and brother are going to tell you all about that. But for my part, I thank you. It's now my pleasure to introduce my sister, my big sister, my older sister.
That's okay, baby. I'm rolling.
My sister, Garrett Morgan, who has been, more than just a big sister to me. She's been an inspiration to me as well. And so I'm really delighted to share the stage with her. And I know that she's going to introduce our brother. But I'm going to hand the clicker over to you.
Thank you, sweetheart. And yes, I am the older sister, but I'm going down in flames, baby. And I'm also
Literally in the fire museum.
right. And I'm putting on my glasses so I can see without any interruptions. My conversations were going to be a little different from my sister's. She is the academic person. I'm the emotional person. And I'm going to tell you some of the things that my grandfather told me. Where is do the clicker? See, I've forgotten already.
Do you want me to help you with that? No.
Is it this one?
No.
This one.
Yeah.
This one. Thank you. I need help from my sister.
Good thing I'm here.
Read that. Personal reflections from grandfather. That's my topic. And many of these things I garnered from him sitting exactly in this chair. And I was sitting either beside him or across from him. First thing is I got from my grandfather's notes. Plus he said to me, "My name is Garrett Augustus Morgan." And Augustus means power. I was born March 4th, 1877 in Paris, Kentucky. And here I had little education. But I am a graduate from the College of Hard Knocks and Cruel Treatment. And I have personally saved 9 lives. And he went on to tell me how and when. Then he said, "These are my words of wisdom to you, little girl," because that's what I was, his little girl. I was the firstborn grandchild. Okay, first of all, keep a notepad and a pencil beside your bed on your nightstand so that if you have an important idea that comes to you when you're dreaming, you can immediately wake yourself up and write it down. Some of my most important inventions have come from my dreams. Put your family first. Include them in all aspects of your life. You will be a small person, and that's the way people talked in those days. You will be a small person if you forget your family and you leave them behind. And I forgot to say, when I got up here showing out, hello family and hello friends. Okay, next, very important. If someone gets in your way of fulfilling your goal, go around them. If they continue to get in your way, you go over them. And if they persist, what do? You go through them. Okay? And that's what my grandfather did. Many times he put his ego aside, but on the big note, he always did what he wanted to do in his own way. Also, he's taught us to work smart, not work hard. Use your mind, not your body. If you have to use your body, do whatever you're doing to the best of your ability, whether it's sweeping a floor, okay, or coming up with ideas such as that breathing device. Just imagine, this man only went to the 5th or 6th grade, and he came up with all of these inventions. Be somebody. This is what he told us. And you have, and you have. And I'm still trying. Be somebody. Plan and prepare for your purpose in life. We all have a purpose. We all have a gift that God has given us. We just have to take time to figure out what our purpose is. Your gift from God determines your future. Lastly, you have a heavy name that I have given you. Do not bring shame to this name. Be somebody. Okay, grandfather, we're going to do this right. I asked my grandfather, why did he only go to the 6th grade? Because I'm like, you're pretty successful. How come I have to keep on going? And he said, because in that day, all the children, white and black in Kentucky, only went to the 6th grade because of the fact they had to be out and work the fields. Back-breaking work, which he had no intention of doing. And he said, I knew that in order to be successful, I had to speak and write with excellent grammar, speech, and diction. I cannot walk into an office and have, excuse me for not being politically correct, I can't go with a southern drawl. I can't go to a white man and say, Master, I need a job, just because. You can't do that. So, when he was in Cincinnati working, he hired a tutor. All right, next, we're going to talk about family. I believe that this is one of the better pictures. I mean, my grandfather was a very distinguished, handsome man. And I believe this is, I want to say this was his wedding picture. Maybe not, but this is what it is to me. Now, I also asked my grandfather, why did you choose Cleveland as your final home? And he said that he was looking for a change, and he was looking for a chance for a square deal. And the city of Cleveland had a reputation, as my sisters talked about, as being an industrial center for the state of Ohio and actually for northeastern part of the United States. But my grandfather did hop a train to come to Cleveland from Cincinnati. And this is the picture of J. Walter Wills, Sr. If any of you are from Cleveland that are, well, not many of you over here, over 50, but I will say, Mr. Wills had just graduated from Antioch College. He was from Yellow Springs, Ohio, and he was my grandfather's friend for life. He was the best man at my grandparents' wedding. Later on, Mr. Wills owned the largest black-owned funeral parlor in the whole state of Ohio. This is my grandmother. I believe this is her wedding picture. If it's not, it is to me. I would say that when my grandfather married my grandmother, at the time, my grandfather was 31 and Mr. Wills was 34. So they had time to figure out who they wanted. And I asked him, "How did you meet, Grandma?" And he said, "She was a seamstress where I worked, and I was sent to repair her sewing machine, which is broken down. And she had a beautiful smile at the time. And she smiled at me, and I smiled back, and we just spoke to each other in a very respectful way. I wasn't flirting, trying to be disrespectful." And then in comes her supervisor, putting his finger in my face and hollering at me and saying, "You colored boys know that you're not allowed to talk to our white women." And when he said that, all hell broke loose. My grandfather got right up in the man's face. My grandmother at the time started crying. And my grandfather said, "I am a man, and you or no one else will tell me who to talk to." He said, "I finished repairing your grandmother's sewing machine. I asked her out to dinner, and I married her September 22nd, 1908. I turned around on my heels that day and told my man at the company boss, I'm gone. I cannot work under these conditions." Now, people have said that my grandfather was fired. Not even close. There's no way with his personality that he would allow someone to talk to him like that and not quit. And as my sister said, eventually our grandmother quit too. We had 3 children. First, we had John Pierpont, who's named after J.P. Morgan, Garrett Augustus Jr., who was our father. And then they had Cosmo Henry, and Cosmo loved my 2 dogs as much as May and I did. My grandfather loved to hunt, and he loved to fish. Now, excuse me for being a little bit slow here. I want to read to you what my grandfather told me. He said, May, he called her May, was my rock. She was true to her promise to stick to me. Excuse me for being emotional. She was true to her promise to stick to me with whatever test we had to face together. We celebrated our 50th wedding anniversary at the Alpha House. Friends, just think about what it is now to be an interracial couple. You know, we all know. But think of what it was in 1908 when my grandfather put the Wakeman Country Club up. I don't think everybody in Northeast Ohio was happy. There were some people put crosses up on our property. So, but what do young people say? It is what it is. Okay, so then I said to grandfather, what did you do, grandfather, after you quit your job? Okay, now, Sandy has told you he had a little business, but he was putting money aside to really start a mechanically oriented business, which he had been saving his money to buy tools and pay rent. And he found a building which is right here on West 3rd, which is also in the garment district. And because of the fact that my grandmother was such an independent woman, I wanted to know from him, was my grandmother just your business partner in name, or was she your business partner in deed and in name? And he went on to show that, first of all, they started a company together where we have Morgan's Cut Rate Clothing Company, and my grandmother was the one that ran that company. That company, if you can see the address, is 2544 Central Avenue. That was in the heart of the black commercial area for the city of Cleveland at that period of time. And my grandmother, by her running the business, it freed him up to be able to solve problems. This was a big deal here. Hair straighten, the result of a dinner call. Now I'm going to tell you a good story here. All right. I asked my grandfather what gave him the idea to invent hair straightener. Because that's just not something you just wake up in the middle of a dream thinking about, you know? So he said he was losing money in production slowdown because of the needles getting hot from heat and friction going through the fabric, and he was losing money from time. Time is money. So he was trying to find a solution to put on these needles, which now that solution would be considered like Teflon. Slide right on through the fabric. All right. But he said, when maid called me to dinner, I knocked some chemicals over as I was getting up from the table, and it tipped over into a wool chamois, which I had on my desk. Well, I don't know if any of you know, but a wool chamois is strictly a piece in those days of lamb cut from the side of a lamb's body. And it is extremely nice and thick and curly. And so when he came back from having dinner, he noticed that chemical had gone over to that chamois and that hair had become straight. And he's like, things that make you go, So first he tried the chemicals on his Airedale, and he burnt the dog. Then he tried to add some things to the chemicals, put them on his head. He went bald 5 times. Now, you know how long it takes to go bald and grow back hair? Bald and grow back hair? But all the while, he was working on different types of solutions that would make that hair straightener. And friends, I want to say to you, because I'm a woman's liber, as you probably could tell, my grandmother here, Mary Morgan, Vice President, Treasurer, keep the money in the family. Don't let no outside accountant handle your money. Just like Oprah said, always count your money first. All right. Now, he continued to develop products and advertise, but he also did it in very non-conventional ways. I wish I had a picture to show you. My grandfather bought an old bus and he refurbished it. He put an organ in the front of that bus. He filled it with all of his products and drove it down south, drove it to the East Coast. And while he would enter the towns, my Uncle John would play that organ so it would get people's attention. And then my father would hack out the side. Come to Joe Smo's barbershop tonight. You're going to get a demonstration. And as my sister said, my grandfather would offer to do people, have people do their hair for free. So if you had white hair, you had your hair done black within 5 minutes. If it was a little too curly and you didn't want it that way, it would be straight in 15 minutes. So, I mean, that was a very unconventional way to advertise your product. So here again, this is a demonstration here. Now, beside this comb here, I don't know if you can see well, this is a cap that fits under your neck. That's an old-fashioned do-rag, people. That's the original do-rag, because it was made out of satin, slipped under your chin. When you woke up in the morning, baby, your hair was laying down. Okay? Now, this is my grandfather. He's supposed to be. He's saying he's born after. This is him with his hair kinky, and this is with his hair straight. Remember when I told you, he said, don't leave your family behind? Relatives were used for commercials. This commercial says here, a Morgan beauty. You got to do what you got to do, family. All right. Now, like my sister said, he would drink that black hair oil stain right in front of everybody, and it was made with pure vegetable dyes, so he wasn't hurting himself or anybody else when he was using that. There he is again in the middle of an oasis with all the beautiful women pouring the oils over him. Before and after. White hair, black hair. Well, this picture here, he decided to keep his hair white since it was appropriate for a 70-year-old man to have white hair. Now, another question I asked my grandfather was, why, grandfather, did you have to change the wording, the verbiage on your patent? All right, I've got my notes out of order because I dropped them as older people usually do. But first of all, I want to say I asked him, what was the inspiration for your last invention? But that's going to come after this. In terms of this picture here, if you can read, I don't know if any of you can read the bottom line here, where it says, this signal, the traffic signal, is thoroughly covered by patents. Mr. Morgan wishes to sell the patent outright or on royalty basis and will consider becoming a party to a corporation for manufacturing and marketing the same. Now, people think about this. What does this really say? This says, first time shame on you, second time shame on me. Okay? Because I know that I did not get the money that I should have gotten for my first patent for that gas mask, because I had to assign my ability to be the complete owner of that patent to a company that I formed with other people. And those other people were not my people. My grandfather went to every black church in the city of Cleveland trying to garner enough money to make that gas mask on his own. He was trying to sell stock to church members. The only person that believed in his dream and wanted to invest in him was his best friend, J. Walter Wills. And so a group of white businessmen approached him and said, Mr. Morgan, you've got a great idea. We know we can make some money. The war is on. You've already proven the worth of your gas masks for fire departments. Let's make some money. My grandfather sold 51% of his interest in his own company, and he became the general manager, not the owner, the general manager of his own company. Now, I want you to think about that. You think about somebody who only went to 6th grade, worked so hard to design. I mean, it takes a lot of work to design. It takes a lot of money to pay a patent attorney. And so I believe my grandfather said, first time, shame on you, second time, shame on me. I'm going to find somebody to go out and buy this patent for me. And that's when he approached General Electric and got his money straight on out. Because I know he could not afford to start building traffic signals. not just for the city of Cleveland, but the whole world. If he had a royalty for half of a penny for every traffic signal in this world, we would be trillionaires. Not gabillionaires, we'd be trillionaires. All right. Yep. You're right, baby. So I asked her, what did you do? Wait a minute. I'm out of here. Somewhere in this pictures, I'm going to show you some marketing. I'm sorry, I got them all mixed up because I dropped them on the floor because I'm not perfect. Yeah, let's see. That's what I'm looking for. That's my grandfather's very last invention. And I was alive when he was trying to sell this invention. What happened was someone called him up on the phone and said, Garrett, your neighbor's house is on fire. And he drove down to the house, ran in the house, and saw his friend laying on the bed with the mattress on fire. But there was one of those kerosene oil lamps right beside the bed. He took that, threw it out the window, because he knew if he hadn't done that, everybody had been blown up, including him. He pulled his friend off the mattress, tried to put the fire out in the mattress, but he could not save his friend. His friend died. But he figured what had happened was his friend was smoking in bed. And that's what he came up with, this cigarette. And right here, in this cigarette, when you get to a certain point at the end of it, there was a little drop of water in plastic. So he called it his self-extinguishing cigarette. I remember my grandfather calling the companies that made Camels, Newports, and all of those, and they said, no, Mr. Morgan, we're not interested because it would be cost prohibitive. But 5 years later, another cigar company came out with a filter that you put on your cigar with water in it called a water air-cooled filter. Basically, they just stole my grandfather's patent. All right, so on we go. I asked him, what did you do with the money that you made from General Electric for that signal? And so he purchased 124 acres in 1924. He said it was his intention to sell lots for $60 to people in the greater Cleveland and greater Ohio area so that they would have their own recreational vacation village with county streets and bordering the Vermilion River. Now, my sister, brother, and I still have that land, and the county still has their streets on our land. So if it ever is realized to be a village, the streets will be there. So my thoughts were, well, how did you sell land in the country to people in the city? Because it didn't make sense to me. So he said, well, I advertised in the Calling Post. I gave the size and costs of the lots. Excuse me. I gave all my future recreation plans. And I offered a personal tour and drive. I told them I will come and pick you up at your home. I will take you on a tour, and then I will take you right back to your domicile. He even got Colonel Saunders in the back seat. If you look hard enough, no, really, but I mean, if you look hard enough, you see it's not all women there. It's probably, they took the husbands were probably outside, and he just took that that picture, and he's got his cigar in his mouth and everything. So I thought that was great, because he told him he was going to pick him up in his Pierce Arrow. That's not a Model T Ford right there, buddy. That's a Pierce Arrow, okay? And I would return them signed, sealed, and delivered as a member of the Wakeman Country Club. All right? And my son, Garrett, made sure that horseback patrons rode safely and confidently. My sons Garrett and John were the lifeguards until we got some other lifeguards. I don't know if I don't think I showed it on the map with all of the lots, but there was a proposed lake, and they did eventually dig out a lake there. All right, we encourage people to come and celebrate different holidays and family gatherings together. And this is my family, my grandfather, grandma celebrating my grandma's birthday. Now, just a little note, by now, my hair is white, so I'm leaving it white because it's appropriate for a man in my age group to have white hair. All right. They also had a dance hall, restaurants, and last 4th of July week, our family came from all over the United States to celebrate our family love together. We met on my grandparents' farm. We call it the farm now. It's no longer the Wakeman Country Club. But this gathering represents his 5 generations right here. This picture represents 5 of the 8 great-grandchildren that he has, with a marker which was presented to him by the William Pomeroy Foundation, the Village of Wakeman, descendants of Garrett A. Morgan, and the Ohio History Connection of 2023. Last September, Miss Marilyn Wainio, I'm sorry, Marilyn, Miss Phyllis Yarber Hogan, members who are both members of the African American Genealogical Society, and the Wakeman Village Volunteer Fire Department, honored Garrett Morgan with the presentation of the Ohio Historical Marker and displays of his achievements and his life in Wakeman. And these are pictures. The chief in Wakeman is also the mayor. That's the chief and the assistant chief with our fire wagon. Oh, he's here, the mayor's here. Okay, great. Great. Hey, I thought you looked familiar. And, sorry, I want to go back. That is the Wakeman Volunteer Fire Department. God bless you. And I would like to, on behalf of Garrett, Sandra, and myself, we wish to thank and acknowledge the Western Reserve Fire Museum and all of its members who we have so happily met and have given us good, positive friendship. We want to acknowledge Mr. Scott Giesler, who is the director of the Board of Trustees. Hopefully we can work many, many, many days together, Scott. Miss Joan Oliver, where's mine? Who is the Director of Education and Public Affairs, who so graciously and tirelessly put this program together. Without Joan, we wouldn't have this program. And we want to thank the Cuyahoga Arts Culture Group for their gracious grant. Mr. Tom Doyle, where is Mr. Tom Doyle? Mr. Tom Doyle, who is the director of the Little Whiz Historical Fire Museum, for lending his breathing device to this museum for display. And again, I want to thank Marilyn Wainio and Phyllis Yarber Hogan, who are members, as I said, of the African American Genealogical Society, for their research contributions to us. Thank you, and I would now like to turn this portion of the program over to my brother, Garrett Augustus Morgan III.
All right, I'm going to try not to cry during this presentation. I might need to get these out, though. Some of my old people apparatus. Okay, we're going to turn this down a notch or two. For my part, I want to talk about grandfather, and we did have to call him grandfather, nothing else. It's nice to see some smiling faces out there. Well, I better go by my little notes. Okay, this is an article that a friend found from the Plain Dealer. You can read it for yourself. It was about grandfather doing his what? Oh, I have some, and it won't make much difference. He applied for his car registration, and he was superstitious, and he got the plates on the 13th, and the last two digits equaled 13. And he was not happy about that. But this is a trend he did all his life. If he saw a problem, he tried to fix it, do something about it. And he wrote back to him, and they sent him a new plate. Okay, this is my grandmother, as you guys know. I wanted to show this, say that she never got the credit I think she deserved. Grandfather was a flamboyant one. He was always out in the forefront doing things. But Grandma kept the home fires burning. And she did everything. Like my sister said, she was a seamstress, which pretty much started the whole thing. She was an accountant for their businesses. She packed and shipped product because I was there helping. She collected rents. My grandfather had several apartments where he lived, and she took care of all that, and she was a wonderful cook. Okay, this is her again, holding me in my ears. This is Corinne and my cousin Harry from Detroit. We lost him about 5 years ago. Everybody was hoping I'd grow into those years, but you can see that didn't happen. My sister's already covered the country club, and this is the farm. That's what we've always called it. And it really was a farm. Before I was born, my grandfather paid another farmer to grow. They grew popcorn. We had a pretty big field back there of corn. But in my lifetime, we grew everything else: potatoes, cabbage, just tomato. We had a garden in 3 different places. But anyway, that's the farm. And by the time I came along, all that hoopla was over. This was grandfather's favorite pastime, and that was Corinne and I on his lap. But he loved it out there. It was quiet, and like I said, he could relax, and all the craziness was behind him. Okay, this is an interesting picture. First of all, let's start at the top. That's a moose head, you see. Grandfather had a pretty good sense of humor. He was very generous, and you can see us standing in front of our luxury house out there. What did I want to tell you about that house? I don't know, but it was an adventure sleeping in that house, believe me. Because my bedroom was right behind where he's standing. We had a screened-in porch, but inside that was my bedroom. And at night, it could be scary. Stuff, you know, coons and whatever living under the house and scratching the floor. But at any rate, my buddy Norris has been out there several times. A lot of you folks have been out there several times. I'll tell you about our day. Usually it was just myself, grandfather, and Miss Rogers. She was a housekeeper. And she helped Grandma at home do everything. But she'd always come out there with us and take care of us and cook. And usually Mr. Mitchell, my grandfather's maintenance man at the apartments, would drive us out there on Friday afternoon and drop us off. And then my father would come out and get us on Sunday. Often Corinne would come with him or other family members. And sometimes on the left side of that picture, we had a big round table in the corner, and we had big family dinners there. But, okay, my job, Miss Rogers would get up first. If it was cold, we had 2 potbelly stoves. She built a fire. And my job was to pump 2 buckets of water. We didn't have inside plumbing. We did have electricity, though. And then she cooked breakfast. And grandfather had it timed perfectly. His feet hit the floor when breakfast was ready. And then we'd have breakfast, and then I'd have to pump 2 more buckets of water for whatever. The grandfather called me. They called our father brother. Everybody, even his parents, called him brother. So, of course, I was baby brother. So, he'd call me. He said, "Baby brother, it's time to go visit Miss Katie." Now, Miss Katie was his name for the outhouse. And we had a 2-holer, although I never saw 2 people in there. But anyway, that was our day. And the worst part was having to stand there and wait for him so I could walk him back. Because I'll give you an idea of how generous he was. Every harvest season, we pick everything. We had another farmer that dig the potatoes, flip the potatoes over. And I remember filling bushel baskets full of potatoes that I couldn't lift. But anyway, we'd take all this stuff. He had a 56 Cadillac. And we could get 5 bushel baskets in the trunk. And when we got home, we had paper shopping bags, like we all probably remember. And I'd fill those bags up, and he knew how many people lived in each apartment. And he'd tell me how many potatoes to put in a bag and how many cabbage and whatever. And we'd go around knocking on doors and give every tenant a bag of fresh produce. And we did that 2 or 3 times every fall. So most of his tenants loved him. He loved to fish. That was his greatest passion when he was younger. He had a serious illness in his later years, and he'd go to Rochester, Minnesota, and be treated at the Mayo Clinic. And there was a river that ran through Rochester, or is, and he loved to fish there. And much of that time he was blind, so I don't know how he managed that, but he did. But one time he came back and he said, Gary, once in a while he called me Gary. He said the fish were biting so good you had to hide behind a tree to bait your hook. So he was a character. Another one is a phobia. He hated cats. Sorry, all you cat lovers, but he could not deal. And he seemed to have a sixth sense, and he knew when one was around. And he'd tell me, get them out of here. I don't want them on our property. No. And one of the farmers out there that just died a few years ago, he used to tell me stories about grandfather when the farmer was a kid. He had a dairy farm across the field. And grandfather would pull up in a great big car, and he'd wait for one of them to come out. And if they were busy and didn't, he'd sit there and wait. And finally they'd come out, and he said, Mr. Morgan, why don't you just get out? We were right there in the barn. You could just stick your head in there and holler for us. And he said, well, you got cats all over the place. It was a dairy farm, and he would not get out of the car. So he'd sit there and wait for them to come to him. But anyway, let's see what else I got on here. Oh, this is the Vermilion River. It borders our property on one side. And that was my playground when I was a child. I was almost always by myself. And I was in the woods goofing around. And one day I came back, and grandfather was sitting in had these big white wicker chairs. He said, baby brother, where you been and what have you been doing? And I said, well, I built a little camp out there, and I dug a little fire pit to cook some hot dogs, and I said I was chopping wood, and even though he was blind, he said, I want to see it. And by now, he's like 83, 84 years old. And I did have a little path, but it was just a little path in the woods. And he said, go tell Miss Rogers we're going for a walk in the woods. And he took my arm, and he had his cane in his other hand. Excuse me. And we walked out there. And it wasn't a hop and a skip and a jump. It was probably at least as long as this bridge. But he went out there, and there was nowhere for him to sit and rest when we got out there. And he leaned on a tree, and he was just happy to be out there. These ladies have already told you about the Wakeman Country Club and how that happened, when it happened. Okay, I got kind of screwed up here too, but see what else I got on here. Okay, you see the ears? I still was working I was 13 here. I was still working at growing into them. And I'm the runt of the family anyway, so I never did quite make it. But this is the last commercially taken picture of grandfather, I'm pretty sure. And that's the 3 generations. And I was 13. And grandfather died the next summer. This is the 4th generation. That's my son and my little granddaughter. And one thing I just noticed this recently myself. Grandfather was 72 when I was born. I was 14 when he died. And I was 72 when my granddaughter was born. So I just realized that the other day. But he would be here today. I'd be trying to pawn this off on him, but he's in California. Okay, this is a mural that a young lady painted that I never met. And it's on Chester Avenue. It's the AFL-CIO building. It's about a block west of 55th Street on Chester. Okay, this is the new fireboat commissioned for Cleveland in 2023. And we'll see that. Oh, that's right, that's right. It's way more technologically advanced than the old fireboat, and they named it after grandfather. Yeah. Okay, but I want to thank everyone for coming.
Well, I thought that was really interesting. I wish I would have known your grandfather. You know, maybe I'd have been there about the right time that I could have kept this growing.
Yeah, there are 3 traffic signals that are still in existence. One is at the Western Reserve Historical Society in University Circle. One is at the American Museum of History, Smithsonian Museum of American History. It is a part of an exhibit called America on the Move, Transportation from 1840 till 2020. The exhibit closes next year in 2026, and then that traffic signal will go to the African American Museum, the Smithsonian Museum of African American History and Culture, where it will join another gas mask. There's a gas mask there, and so there will be a larger exhibit of the two and a greater exhibit about Garrett Morgan. And the third one is at the Charles Wright African American Museum in Detroit, Michigan.
With that, again, thank you all for coming. Enjoy yourselves here. And again, the Garrett Morgan boat will be on display at East 9th Street.